Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, May 27th, 2026, and today we're talking summer cover cropping. How and why to use buckwheat as a cover crop, planting into a cover crop residue, and sun hemp. So let's do it. All right, happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. It's your last week of May, too, so, make it count, I guess. It's still wet as all get out here. We're about, 7 inches of rain in from this week and currently in a flood watch, which is super cool. I mean, our farm won't flood. We're on a ridge. If our farm floods, the world has much bigger problems. But the entire area is just like one giant sponge right now. Walking through the garden, I sink like every time I take a step. I harvested in the rain all day yesterday as well, which is generally fine with me. I don't mind working in the rain. I kind of enjoy it when it's relatively warm, but my gosh, is it exhausting. Something about, your clothes suddenly weighing an extra 20 pounds and everything you're carrying weighs an extra 20 pounds. So it just kind of takes it out of you. Even the carrots I was harvesting inside of the tunnel were caked with wet soil. Yeah, in the tunnel. That's how wet we were. It's just so wet that it's wet everywhere. The kids, however, enjoyed it quite a bit. So at least the rain brings some entertainment along with it. I do start to worry after this many days in a row of rain about rot and crop loss, and saw a little damage in the lettuce yesterday. But hopefully we are through it now and we will just, get normal rain from here on out. That would be fun and new. Well, I definitely have some cultivating to do here in the milpa patch, but it took on the water pretty well, all things considered. Yeah, pretty happy with that. Everything looks like it is jamming along. Otherwise, here's the plan for the day. As usual on Wednesdays, we're doing a compilation episode, putting together some of the older segments into something a bit more themed. And that theme today is summer cover crops, with a nod to planting into cover crop residue. It's a good time for this subject as well as we head into the summer and we start flipping those beds to get a plan together for how to use that space that we want to keep in place and reinvigorate without making things harder on ourselves, i.e. using cover crops. And we want to make sure we do that successfully. So anyway, that's your theme for today, and I hope you enjoy a younger me. Yeah. The other day at a restaurant, I got asked if I wanted my senior discount, which of course I said yes, but I think that's a little premature. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm looking more senior-y than I thought I did. Anyway, here's younger me, and you can be the judge. All right, so buckwheat is a fun little cover crop, but only if it's done right. Let's talk for a minute about how to use this famous cover crop and how not to use it. First, some things to think about or to know about buckwheat is that it is very fast. This is a crop that will flower in about 25 to 30 days if it's planted at the right time. And those flowers can be great for beneficials, though beekeepers notably loathe buckwheat for the flavor it imparts on honey, which some describe as smoky molasses, which incidentally is a free novelistic name for the taking if you want it. The buckwheat flowers do also turn into seeds after about 2 to 3 weeks, so it's important that the crop is terminated well before that point, unless you're hoping for buckwheat as a grain, which, to be fair, is used for making soba noodles or can make a nice rich addition to pancakes and cookies, so that is a thing. Buckwheat roots are also really good for gathering phosphorus for the soil and other nutrients. Plus, although the roots are fairly shallow, those roots can help lock soil in place after a tillage event to keep it from blowing or washing away. Now, how does one make the most of these characteristics? Well, first, buckwheat is an excellent placeholder. If you don't need a bed for a couple or a few weeks, buckwheat has your back. It will cover that bed and even enrich it while you wait to replant it. Sometimes this may happen if, say, you have a crop failure and the next crop you plan for that spot is still not ready to go in, or maybe you have a crop that just does really well and comes out early, or you forget to seed something on time, or whatever the case may be. Buckwheat can fill that spot while you wait. It does not have to get all the way up to the flowering stage for it to be helpful either. That's not a requisite. There have been times where I have had buckwheat in just for like 2 or 3 weeks and then mowed the green leafy mass and planted the next crop. Also, because it grows so fast that it can help suppress weeds, which can be useful in situations where maybe the bed got a little weedy last year. It's also said to have a mild allelopathic effect, which means it puts out a weed suppressant chemical out of its roots. And then though that might be true, the shade is probably doing a lot of the work to suppress the weeds by outpacing and thus weakening them. Anyway, back to mowing the buckwheat for a second. In a no-till situation, this is also a great characteristic of buckwheat. It's relatively easy to terminate with just a low to the ground mowing. I like the sort of chop and drop versus any sort of crimping, though you could theoretically crimp it, because it is fast and buckwheat is incredibly tender. So it's not going to leave behind a like a difficult, or for that matter, a helpful layer of plant material to contend with like grasses do. It is, of course, notably a summer-only cover crop. Buckwheat is frankly a wuss when it comes to cold soil or cold weather, and will not germinate in low soil temperatures nor grow very fast in cool air temperatures. One thing I see a lot is people, including seed companies, adding buckwheat to their summer cover crop mixes. No, don't do that. Or at least don't add it directly to the mix. We just talked about how buckwheat is a great weed suppressant crop. So if you sow it with other cover crops, it will suppress those too. The only exception are things like radishes and arugula, if you do not plan to plant a brassica in that same place, for the next crop or two. Plus mung beans, which, albeit not a traditional cover crop, are a relatively fast legume. What I would recommend in general, though, is wanting to include like in a diverse cover crop mix, is simply sowing it like 10 or 14 days after you sow the original mix. Otherwise, the buckwheat will just cause problems. It's like that. To sow it, you will need to get the seeds at least lightly covered with the soil somehow. So either sow it onto, toss it onto bare soil and lightly rake it in and then run it over with like a bed roller, or just use a seeder to get it in the soil. Seeders like the Earthway or the Jang bury the seeds as they cover them simultaneously as they plant them. It's very clever. Wait until a couple weeks after your last chance of frost for best growth. All of that to say, buckwheat is an affordable and effective cover crop in the right conditions. In the wrong situation, however, it can become a weed. So, just be smart about it. And follow the seed recommendations from the purveyor in terms of how much per acre. I once got this special type of European buckwheat on accident where the seeds were like super, super tiny and they all loved soccer. If I had sowed that at the same rate that I sow my normal buckwheat, it would have swallowed the entire state of Kentucky. So just follow the seed purveyor recommendations based on they'll know what the type of seed is. Today's episode is brought to you by BCS America. If you're practicing no-till or low-till farming, you know that heavy equipment is often the enemy of your soil structure. That's where BCS two-wheeled tractors come in. Built for small farms, market gardens, and regenerative growers, BCS tractors give you the power to manage beds efficiently without unnecessary compaction. For the low and no-till grower, there are two attachments that change the game. The BCS Power Harrow stirs only the top inch or two of soil to incorporate soil amendments and create a perfect seed bed without soil inversion or pulling up weed seeds. And when it's time to terminate cover crops, that flail mower shreds organic matter into a beautiful, nutrient-rich mulch right on top of the bed. To find your local dealer and see the full lineup of attachments designed for the way you farm, head to bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so yesterday we talked about some things to know when planting into thick compost mulch, but now how about we focus on some tricks and considerations for planting into a thick cover crop mulch? Luckily, we did that whole segment last week too on cover crop mulching, but what we haven't really done yet is talk much about how to actually get a crop into that mulch. So envision it with me. It's early summer. Your cover crop is down in a thick mat that looks and smells like gold, although I've never actually smelled gold. I'm just assuming there. And you have a bunch of tomato plants to get planted. What now? Well, first, if you can tell where the beds are, you're going to want to make sure to string it out so that, the row is straight, because there is obviously no easy way to mark rows with fresh mulch on top of them. This can actually be quite a challenge when it comes to cover crop. One thing you can do is you can plant your pathways to a different cover crop than your beds, and that way you can kind of differentiate where the bed is and where the pathway is. Or if you're using mounded beds, it's a little bit easier. So do it however it makes sense for you. I usually use like carpenter twine or whatever string that I can find laying around attached attached to stakes on either end of the bed, as you can see in this video where I'm digging blueberry holes, and not into compost mulch, but just in general. And then I measure the distance between the plants and stop and dig a hole. Yeah, pretty simple there. The best tool I've found for this is my spade shovel. You can use a trowel or something, but I've tried the auger bit that we use in the tunnels and on, like compost mulches and bare soil, which is just attached to a drill. But the cover crop roots and residue is a little too much for that particular setup. So the spade shovel cuts right through the mulch, and it's easy to cut a nice 8-inch or so diameter hole for your nice large tomato transplant. Anyway, yes, you dig a hole, pretty straightforward there. But I also make sure to mix in some nice compost and with the soil in that hole to get the tomatoes or peppers or whatever off to a good start, because the cover crop can be a little slow and stingy with the nutrients at first. Then I cover the soil block, obviously. And because I brought up a little new soil, if I have any supplementary mulch handy, I will also add that around the plants, because, weeds in bare soil is one thing because you can just cultivate them with a hoe. Weeds in a mulch are a whole other because they, all have to be pulled by hand. There's no easy way to cultivate them. Anyway, like I said, to dig the hole, a shovel or trowel will mostly do it. Sometimes if the soil feels really cool, as is the case under the cover crops, it's worth leaving the holes open in the sun for the day, just so the plants don't go into really cold soil. Like basically you just have an open hole. Kind of warms up just a little bit. You set the plant in there and it's not going in directly into super cold soil. That'll help get it a good start. If you put tomatoes into really cool soil, like we've done it after a cover crop before, they will kind of slink off a little bit. They'll look rough. And that's partially just because the cover crop, kept that soil so cool for so long. Then, of course, once you get them in the soil, it's just about staking them and moving on. So if that's it, Jesse, why are we wasting a segment on this? Well, the other side of this, planting into cover crop thing is seeding. Are there any good seeding options for, say, corn, beans, etc. on a small scale? Yes and no. It just depends on what scale you're working with here and, of course, your budget. There are a few seeders out there that can drill directly into thick mulch, but they mostly have to be imported. The double disc opener that I use on the Jang is not adequate for this, so I wish it was. That would be amazing. It just is not a heavy enough machine or a strong enough machine to bust through like thick cover crop. The big guys will often use a slicing mechanism that looks like that double disc opener that essentially cuts right through the mulch and drops seeds in behind. But like on a small sort of micro scale, it's harder to find such an option. One, because you need a lot of weight for it to work, like to push through that mulch, weight like a tractor. And two, because, nobody really makes these things because there just isn't a huge market for seeding into cover crop mulch on a human scale. There's just not a ton of us doing that. One option is simply digging a furrow through the mulch, which is not easy, but it can be done, and sowing something and then covering that back with the mulch. And that would work for anything from beans and peas and that sort of stuff, but also to maybe like garlic. You just dig your furrow, you drop your garlic in, and then you mulch right over top of that with something, either compost or some other supplementary mulch, and it grows right through. But again, not easy, can be done, and sowing something and then covering it back with the mulch, will take a little extra work. You will get weeds also with that, but if your weed management was good going into growing that cover crop, then it should not be too bad after the cover crop is grown. Hopefully. You could also use compost as a plantable layer on top of or like in rows with the rye mulch or whatever cover crop mulch that you're using to help with seeding into. My friend Susanna Lane of Salamander Springs broadcasts beans before she crimps her rye cover crop. So they just basically like grow up through, like the cover crop gets pushed down on top of the beans and then they just sort of grow up through. And she's done that for years. It's really successful for her. It just probably takes a little practice, takes a lot of weed control. Make sure if you're going to try something like that to start small. Try, just do a little trial and then you can kind of go from there. Because it could give you a really good stand of beans or something, but it could also give you the complete opposite. So, we want to avoid that. Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If the season is picking up and the pile of receipts is starting to grow, you're not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping so you can stay ahead of the mess before it piles up. They keep your books organized each month, help you understand what's coming in and what's going out, and show you where your farm stands so you can make better business decisions throughout the season. If you're behind, they'll help get everything caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. All right, so I've been wanting to do a series on the different summer cover cropping options. Like last week, we covered buckwheat. So today, I thought we'd talk a little bit about one I have enjoyed using on and off over the last few years, sunn hemp. This is a tall, vigorous summer legume that I frankly do not talk enough about, but has been a favorite of ours in years past, especially leading into garlic planting in the fall. It builds soil organic matter really well. It does not harbor harmful nematodes. It's kind of actually good at not harboring them specifically. It fixes oodles of nitrogen, oodles being like roughly 120 to 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre, depending on the condition, which it may be slightly above average for a legume, or at least in the range of a slightly above average. It also generates a lot of above ground biomass, which may not make a perfect mulch, but can provide some nice organic matter to the surface. Although it's worth noting that sunn hemp can also be quite fibrous, so that's something to take into consideration, basically that it will leave a mass of stuff on the surface for you to have to deal with later. However, it can have a lot of those benefits in a short amount of time, like 8 to 12 weeks, which is pretty fast for so much goodness compared to other legumes and other cover crops. Now, some important little tidbits when it comes to this crop. One, the seeds need to be buried about 1.5 or so inches beneath the soil to germinate. In other words, just broadcasting it on the soil surface ain't going to cut it. You really have to make sure that it has good seed to soil contact and seed to soil coverage. Two, it's a great mixer with things like sorghum Sudan grass and sesbania, both of which are crops I will talk about another time because they are both good summer cover crops, and that makes a nice little mix. Three, if you are on poor soil or especially sandy soil where root knot nematodes can be an issue, sunn hemp might be a no-brainer to add to the summer cover crop mix. Also, if you, like many of our friends just south of us, do not get the hard, consistent frost that we get here in Kentucky to kill off, say, peas and or oats, then a later summer cover crop mix that includes sunn hemp and sorghum Sudan grass might be the ticket. Those will die relatively easily in a hard frost or two and leave a nice mulch to protect your soil all winter and give you a good fresh start in the spring. Just rake off that mulch if you want to and plant and enjoy. Yeah. Last, sunn hemp is strictly a summer starter. It will not germinate in cold soil. The soil really has to be in general like in that 70-ish degree Fahrenheit range. So that's like 21 Celsius. Also, fun fact, it's not just traditionally a cover crop. It is also a forage crop for livestock, but can also be used as a fiber crop for clothing, baskets, nets, and etc. You can just use your imagination. All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Can't you feel? Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. You all do that so often. Like, we sell so many books, and still, it's like 6 years later, and I really appreciate it. That really does go to making this content. So shouts to you all. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of May, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Foggy Ridge Farmstead. I feel like that could be the name of our farm too. Shouts to you all, and shouts for keeping the story going, which, as you will remember, our hero Robbie, the food critic, is headed up the mountain towards the mysterious secluded village, and on the way has to stop to pitch a tent. Overnight, something is heard rummaging through his campsite, and anyway, the next morning, Robbie doesn't see anything, but he does see some rather odd, large tracks around his tent and site. Something relatively big was there. A bear? It's not entirely clear. Who knows? Anyway, he restarts his trek up the mountain, and about 4 hours later, he arrives. A group of kids is playing in the street and eye him suspiciously. A stern-looking man walks out of a nearby cabin and calls Robbie over. "You look tired," he says. Robbie agrees, and he tells the man that he's a food writer and he was just hoping to, talk to some folks in the village about what they eat and kind of get an idea for the cultural foods, all those things. And at this, the man kind of smiles. He gets really bright, and, the village is clearly like they're guarded about many things, but they seem to be very proud of their food. And the man tells him, "A meal then? We can get you a meal. Head right over to that cabin there." And that is for tomorrow on In the Stew. All right. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.